Welcome to the members of the media. Welcome to the members of the public joining us via the internet. My name is Alex Dongs. I am the press secretary to the Prime Minister. And this afternoon, you will be addressed by the Prime Minister on a number of matters of national importance. Joining the Prime Minister is the Deputy Prime Minister, the Honorable Santia Brashaw, also the Ministry of Transport and Works. With her is the Attorney General, the Honorable Dale Marshall. Also flanking them will be the Minister of Health and Wellness, Dr. the Most Honorable Senator Jerome Walcott, as well as the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, the Honorable Kerry Simmons. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to the Prime Minister, after which we will engage members of the media for questions. Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Alex. Good afternoon, Barbadians. Good afternoon to members of the media. I indicated earlier this week that I would want to speak with the country, and I am so doing. Last Friday night, this country was put into shock at the notion that people, after a hard week's work, could not go and recreate at a place of public entertainment without having their lives put at risk. Regrettably, this was the culmination of other shocking acts of violence, gun violence in particular, but I'm not going to leave out the violence that is domestic or the violence that triggers an inability to resolve conflict appropriately, as we have seen some people go over the course of this year and of course before. This has shocked every right-thinking Barbadian, and it has caused us to wonder what is in the minds of those who will want to commit acts of terror on their own society, because they are not only putting at risk those who they came to maim or kill, but they are seeking also to be reckless as to who suffers, who loses their life. The clearest example of this is a shooting that would have hit, regrettably, two young Barbadians, two children. Let me be very clear in my language, two Bajan children. And this is the point at which this country must do that which we were taught to do, to stand up and to protect the vulnerable, and that there must be a whole-of-nation approach. When I read yesterday's paper and I saw the comments of the head of the private sector and the Bishop of Barbados, I wondered whether they had gone into my head and had a clue as to what I was coming to address the country about, or if it is just simply that those of us who have been brought up in this country and know the Barbadian way know exactly what is required of us. I have on at least two occasions in the last 3 months addressed this country. The first occasion I spoke to the issue of actions that we would take as a government in terms of law enforcement, and some of them have already been passed, like the New Bail Act, the establishment of the serious crime squad within the Barbados Police Service that they asked the National Security Council to note that they wanted to do in accordance with the recommendations of the International Police Advisory Service report that was done on them. Second time was to speak to Barbadian families and Barbadians generally about stepping up and recognizing that while the police and the other law enforcement officials will do their job and the court system must do their job, that the wider job of how we as parents, as individuals, as partners, as wherever we're found in this society, how we must step up to be able to make that definable difference, to be able to tell people, pull back down, pull back down. Today I come to you again, conscious that these things must now be brought together as one. And as a result of that, when I read, therefore, the comments of the head of the private sector, Mrs. Tanis, as well as the Bishop of Barbados, Bishop Maxwell, we recognize that there is more in common than most of us realize. As a result, the National Security Council met on Sunday afternoon when I returned to the island, and it met again on Tuesday. The reality is that we have taken this thing with absolute seriousness, but this is not the only time the Security Council has been meeting. The AG will tell you, as well as the other members, that we have met multiple times since the beginning of June, trying to be able to pull all the different strands together. I want to announce this afternoon, consistent with the words and wishes of those who spoke yesterday, that the government of Barbados has agreed that we will establish immediately a national advisory council on citizen security. And this council on citizen security is intended to be able to have the widest possible ownership of the things that we must consider and do in order to be able to ensure that Barbados does not fall down the rabbit hole that regrettably other countries have fallen down into as a result of the access in particular to assault weapons and automatic weapons even. We believe that the time has come for us, therefore, to have that council not only respond to matters that we will send to it either from the Office of the Attorney General or the Ministry of National Security, but equally they are then empowered, because they will have their own secretariat, to be able to send stuff to us or to be able to engage with groups or subgroups within the public to be able to determine what else they believe is of merit that should come to us. And this will range from programs and policies to draft legislation to things that will not only be the domain of government, but hopefully will also be able to spark interest and participation on the part of all Barbadians. And there are things that we know. We have slipped and slid throughout the years. There is no one decade that is responsible. There is no one generation that is responsible. There is no one party that is responsible. There's no one institution that is responsible. If you look at the trajectory over the years, you will have seen the sliding in almost every area. When things like that happen, we have to press brakes and we have to consciously determine how we are going to recalibrate and refocus. I believe that this advisory council, in addition to all of the other institutions that we have, the Law Reform Commission, which has been doing excellent work in teeing up the legislation for us, like the Bail Act, like the plea bargaining legislation, like the other pieces that have been brought, like the criminal procedure rules that are shortly going to be before Parliament. They continue to do their work. The Criminal Justice Research Unit continues to do its work. The Crime Prevention Arm and the Peace Program continue to do their work. The social sector ministries continue to do their work. But we need in one place to lay claim to own what we are doing on a defined basis and in a way that is sustained. We are good as a people at sprints. We're not so good at marathons. And this really is a forever change. We are going to have difficult discussions as a people whether Barbados can ever become a gun-free society, other than those who hold guns in the protective services. If you ask me, Motley, I would tell you that that is what I favor. But I know a lot of other people don't. And as Prime Minister, my duty is not to give you Mia Motley's view, but is to be able to facilitate a national conversation, even if it is a difficult conversation. There are pieces of legislation that the opposition have asked for, the anti-gang initiative. That must go to this council. Similarly, the police have said to us that they would wish to see the passage of wireless intercept legislation, electronic intercept legislation, so that the intelligence received by the law enforcement authorities can be used in a court of law as evidence rather than simply being treated as intel as it has been all through the years. My friends, these things are appropriately located in being able to develop a national consensus through which, from which this body can effectively advise then the Ministry of National Security and the Office of Attorney General. There are other things, as I said, that we may not be speaking about at this point in time. And some of them may relate to programs which we have that will allow us to be able to get on board. We have reached a stage where Barbados must come fully first for all of us. And one of the reasons that this is pivotal at this point in time is that I don't think any of us recognize the Barbados that we've seen in the last few months, with the drive-by shootings and the spraying of people and the kind of ignorant, foolish behavior and reckless behavior as to the consequences of people's actions. I'm going to come back to that in a bit, but I want to share with you that this council will be chaired by an eminent Barbadian, former Senator Velma Newton, Professor Velma Newton, headed the law library, but more importantly in recent times has been handling on behalf of the university and on behalf of governments outside of the region like the Canadian government, major impact projects for justice improvement, and working with the Implementation Agency for Crime and Security in CARICOM as well. And I want to thank her for agreeing to give of her time to chair this council. We've invited the President of the Senate, Senator Reginald Farley, the Most Honorable Senator Reginald Farley, to serve as the Deputy Chair, because we felt that in its own right, a representative of the legislature needed to be there, but not in a way that is intended in any way to be partisan, but intended to be nation-building fully. I have spoken to the Leader of the Opposition. In fact, that is one of the reasons why we were back and forth in terms of trying to reach him. And I've invited either he or his spokesperson on crime to serve on this advisory council on citizen security. The private sector, obviously, I said that Mrs. Tannis was like she was reading my head. And she and I have spoken multiple times, and she will serve in her own right. And that gives you an idea of the seriousness with which we are treating to this matter. But in addition to Mrs. Tannis, we also will be inviting the President of the Chamber of Commerce, Mr. James Clark, and the CEO of Goddard's Enterprises, Mr. Anthony Ali. Many people may not know that Goddard's Enterprises has been quietly working in Santia's constituency with Parkinson School, not just with the physical refurbishment of the school, but also with an internship program with the youngsters from the school, trying to make a positive difference to people's lives without even people knowing or any fanfare. Of course, the labor movement. I've already spoken to the General Secretary of the Barbados Workers' Union, who has designated one of her officers to be able to serve. And we have not been able to speak to Setu Sab today because this has been their annual general meeting. But I'm now told that Colin has finally gotten them for me and that Mr. DePisa will serve as the Setu Sab rep. I have spoken myself to the Barbados Bar Association president, and she has indicated that Senior Counsel Mr. Michael Lashley will serve on behalf of the Barbados Bar Association. And may I say that Mr. Lashley was constructive and engaged last year in the 2 days of the criminal justice reform, and I thank him for also agreeing to serve with respect to the person. The BW rep is Kamisha Benjamin, and with respect to the NCPTA, we are reaching out to them as well because we believe that it is critical that civil society be on board. The head of Parados, Cicely Clark Richmond, has also agreed to serve on behalf of Parados, and you know how I feel that parental education is at the core of a lot of what we must do in this country. We will invite a representative of the Barbados Youth Parliament, and as you would appreciate, they have to meet and determine among themselves who that representative will be. In her own right, I've invited someone that most of you in the media will remember, Ms. Sharon Lynch, former Chief Information Officer, because we felt it was important also to have someone who understands the media and understands how this information moves in a small society like this. And it is critical because in a lot of instances, rumor and fact are not the same. And what we are having is people taking action on the basis of fake news. Of course, the faith community is absolutely critical. We have invited the Barbados Evangelical Association, and they have nominated Reverend Winston Clark. We have invited the Barbados Christian Council, but have not been able to get a name from them as yet. And we are inviting the Muslim Association, and I've spoken to Mr. Nana already, who will serve on behalf of the Muslim Association. In addition to that, our future is in the hands of our educational institutions. And while the council is a little large, we took a decision that it is important to have all 4 representative bodies of our school system. The Barbados Union of Teachers, through its president, Mr. Rudy Lovell, Barbados Secondary Teachers Union, Mary Redmond, or her rep, the Association of Primary School Principals, and the Barbados Association of Public Secondary School Principals. And all of them have agreed to serve on this council that we speak of. Children and young people is where this is going to begin and end. Of the murders committed for the year by gun violence, the Attorney General has advised me that 1 in every 3 have been committed by persons under the age of 21. That does not mean that we're not concerned about the ones who are over 21, but we have a double concern about those between the ages of 16 and 21 who now find themselves facing charges of murder, and under our law can face the most serious penalties known to our system. This is not who we are, nor where we want to be as a people. And as a result, I am satisfied that those educational institutions must be present. It is also important that we have the presence of someone who knows law enforcement. And I'm very happy that the former Deputy Commissioner of Police, Mr. Oral Williams, has also agreed to serve enthusiastically on this body, because out of this must come definitive change for our people and our way of life. I mentioned that it will have a secretariat, but we are also engaging Mr. Corin Bailey, who is the director for the Center of Criminal Justice Research and Security at the University of the West Indies. It is a university-wide center and not just limited to Barbados. And we believe that we should have access, separate from the criminal justice research persons within the Office of the Attorney General, that we should have access to the best resources that are available within the region. And I've also indicated to Mr. Bailey that if we need to go outside of the region for further support, as was happening with other agencies in the past, we will so do as well. My friends, this council is a serious council, and its membership are serious, credible people in this nation from diverse backgrounds. It is intended, in addition to the legislature, in addition to the executive, to be the bridge to civil society, to be able to allow us to have a nationally owned program to take our country back to the place where it is not at risk of panic, or it is not on a pathway to poverty as a result of the kinds of things that are happening. And let me break it down. If people are frightened to go to a karaoke on a Friday or Saturday night, the people who work in those places will not have jobs. And if across the island, people losing jobs because places not getting the business, the truck drivers who deliver the goods will not have jobs. We saw it in COVID, when immediately when you reduce the number of persons who either were coming to the island or who, by the same token, were subject, obviously, to the restrictions on movement, it meant that there was business interruption, so much so that the government had to introduce a new benefit called business interruption benefit for those people who had not been within the National Insurance Scheme system. I believe that we have to understand who we are. When we come together as a people, we can make that defined difference. We determined when we came to office that we wanted to save the dollar. We didn't do it as a government alone. We spread a big tent and we brought everybody in the tent. And we were able to do that, so much so that we have reserves now that are significantly better than anything that we would have ever seen. When we confronted COVID, we couldn't do it as a government alone. We brought everybody once again. We did that at the Hilton, you may recall, and then we continued with that. When we had to deal with the very serious challenge that this country has with a declining population for the Social Security, that we all will have to rely on the pension reform that's necessary and the reform of the National Insurance Scheme, we came together as a people. I am asking Bajans to step up and not only allow this advisory council on citizen security to function and work, but for each of us to play our part. And it is against that backdrop I want today to thank those parents and those family members and community members who have already been calling in to the law enforcement and different agencies saying, look, I don't mind that this person is my family, but I prefer to see them alive than to see them dead. And that even if they end up in prison, they're going to come out. But when they end up in Coral Ridge or Westbury, there's no way to bring them back out yet. So that a number of Bajans have already been calling in. And it is this kind of thing because human intelligence and human cooperation is as important as any other form of intelligence and cooperation. And the police have therefore been able to be far more effective because the level of cooperation is increasing significantly, and it is increasing largely because agents, I believe, do not like what they're seeing. They're anxious, some may even be deadly afraid, but they do not like what they are seeing. And we are all at a point, in fact, my problem is that this council really has been enthusiastically met by those who want to serve. And our difficulty is going to be, and I've said to them, they may have to create a number of subcommittees to be able to have even wider penetration across civil society and across the private sector and the labor movement, and of course, our families and our communities. I spoke just now about people calling in. And I want to thank the Commissioner of Police and his people for speaking frontally with the media on Sunday night and giving them the briefing in part that I got. Because you must know the circumstances behind these acts of terror that are tormenting Barbadians' state of mind and sense of comfort. Conflict is not new. It is the weaponry that is new. But the conflict is not acceptable either. And that is why we ask people to step up and to start to deal with the reality that there are better ways to resolve. Just because somebody steps on your foot don't mean that you got to take a gun and shoot them or pull a knife and stab them. Somebody might even, and I said this at Parkinson School many years ago, and they blistered me, Jerome, if you remember, that Bajans got to learn to take a horn. And I got blistered for it because the media carried it just as I said it there. And to that you remember. But the reality is that it is true. And just because somebody chooses to leave somebody or to go to somebody else does not give anybody the right to take their life. And regrettably, some of the lives that have been lost in the last 2 years have been as a result of that. You may buy a bottle of rum, it's yours. And somebody come and unscrew the cap and pour out some. You don't like it, but that does not give you the right to take their life, as has happened in recent times. And of course, Senior Minister Walcott will tell you that we know the impact that the lack of mental wellness can have. And that if you have a person who is not thinking straight or acting straight, there is no amount of reasoning with that person. In fact, that person at times can be more challenging to deal with than a genuine criminal. Because you can reason with a criminal, But you invariably, for a person who is suffering from serious mental illness problems, you may not be able to do so. Although at 2 o'clock this morning, I sent Jerome an article from the Financial Times showing that there may well be hope on the horizon for medication for people suffering from schizophrenia finally after 70 years of diagnosis. And these are the kinds of things that we will continue to stay engaged with, because nobody sets out to be sick physically or to be sick mentally. But we have to put the systems in place to support them. When the police spoke Sunday night, they would have indicated to you that there was one particular young man, young Bajan, who was the target of a person's fire of shots on Friday night. I am told, and I believe your papers have already reported, that fortunately this young man has seen wisdom and has surrendered himself to police custody. And I am thankful for that, because any more people dying as a result of him, or he dying as a result of a targeted shoot, is not what we want to see in this country. I also want, however, to say that there are those who are continuing to feel that they can run, but the reality is that you can run and run and run away, but you can't run away forever. And we have, yesterday, one tried to run to Canada. And the truth is that the airline did not submit, I'm told, the advanced passenger information in good time. And as a result, when it came to law enforcement, he was already in the air. But he's in Canadian police custody, and he will be back. And I want all those who believe that they can run and run and run, believe you me, the law enforcement agencies of the country are fully committed to the task at hand. Yesterday, we had the swearing in of a new chief of staff. But even with the swearing of the new chief of staff, we are lucky, because the former chief of staff remains as the executive director of the regional security system, and we have taken a formal decision that he should still be allowed to be a member of the National Security Council. So we get the benefit of both the experience of the former chief of staff, who is the executive director of the regional security system, along with the energy and interest. And you heard the chief of staff yesterday speak about the commitment of the Barbados Defence Force to go into the communities. The Deputy Prime Minister has already been working with them to try to be able to frame out community-based programs, because when we were growing up, I went to Trent Summer Day Camp. I belonged to groups, social groups. I worked enough backstage, from prop over to theatrical performances to everything. Where are we seeing new cultural groups, new sporting groups, new community groups? Where are we seeing opportunities to give young people purpose? The government has said over and over, it's not a question of money. Let's be very frank now. People in Boy Scouts, in Girl Guides, in Sea Cadets, in Normal Cadets, in Pathfinders, there's a whole host of groups. But the biggest problem is not access to money, because we will help. The biggest problem is access to time, of people who will volunteer their time to go and be the Cub Scout leaders, to go and be the ones who are organizing the various activities, or to be the one who is going to do, like all of the people that we know through the years. There were Bajans who gave their life to institutions and organizations in this country, and we need to see a similar commitment on the part of our people. Even down to cricket clubs, football clubs, the numbers of people participating, netball clubs are too few. And you find that if you're working with these young people over and over, you develop relationships with them, you develop trust with them, and you're in a position to also give them some love if they're not getting love at home. You're in a position to give them some advice if they're not getting the advice at home. And that is why I learned a lesson as a 16-year-old in this country, and forgive me for sharing this story, when my uncle was the director of the National Cultural Foundation, and I heard him in his office take a call from a group in St. Andrew who wanted some stage sections and some tents. And I learned a life lesson that afternoon. I heard him say, no, to the man who called. So when he got off the phone, I said, Elton, how you telling people no? I see you got stage sections up there. And people, he said, that is true. He said, but they must learn to negotiate for themselves in the communities in which they live. Mr. So-and-so, he told them, had a shop and had tarpaulin that he used to use off of the shop so when the rain fall, the people won't get wet. And the other man down the road, I can't remember his name, was a mechanic. He had 2 lorries. Pull the 2 lorries together, that's a stage section. Get the tarpaulin and hang it over, that's the roof in the event that the rain fell. That was not perfect, but what it was is that it forced them to go and negotiate and to get to know the older people in the community. And the older people in the community then got to know them and then got to realize that these people are not trying to do something nefarious, they're trying to help themselves. I want to urge us to have a Barbados again, where each of us recognizes that we need to step up to the plate. That this government started the One Family program. How many of us have really determined that this is something that we want to contribute to? Because with the best will in the world, and believe you me, we have introduced new welfare benefits and increased welfare by more than 40% in the rates. But how many of us out there are truly making the effort to carry along our brothers and our sisters in a serious way? The pursuit of individualism and the existence of this has been the enemy of communal interaction. And I need us to recognize that the one thing that AI can't give us, machine learning can't give us, is that ability to be there, to be empathetic, and to do the things that we need to do. My friends, I want to say that while we will wait for substantive matters from the Advisory Council on citizen security, and while we will send stuff to them like the wireless intercept and the anti-gang legislation for their urgent review, there are some things that we don't need to wait on them for. And the Attorney General has already been tasked and has agreed to move with dispatch on a few of these things. Because it is not only the large crimes that matter. I take the language of Tanya Stevens. It is corruption in high and low places. And very often we have turned an eye against the disorder, the unruly behavior, and a number of things that we have allowed to slip over time. And that's why I said there's no one point, no one time, no one institution. But there are some things that we must now apply ourselves to with utter discipline and utter commitment. We have laws that govern tints on vehicles. They don't govern and don't allow dark tints. It must stop. And the government has set a target date that no later than the 14th of October, persons who are not having tints that are compliant, in other words, the light tint, will be fined. I'm not interested in prosecuting the body. I tell the AG so already, I want money. I want money. You understand? If you are involved in behavior that leads to those tints still being there, such that the police or anybody passing through can't see you, and you believe that you can just drive around with impunity and shoot and do what you want to do, start paying some fines. And I want Bajans to be aware that one of the things that the police have indicated, that those cars that are commonly known across the country obviously are at risk of theft in some instances. Toyota Yaris, Toyota Axio, those are the two that have been the subject of a lot of theft and a lot of the foolishness that's going on. And then sometimes what you find is that people then break down the car into parts and sell so it can't be traced. So we are aware, the law enforcement has briefed us fully of what is happening. So tints is one. The regulation of number plates is another one. And this notion that any and everybody can make a number plate, those days are done. And there will be strict regulation, and the fines will be high fines, because as I said, the prison is to be for real criminals. The ones who want to play that they're helping criminals by facilitating, pay your money. Because you're doing it for money, give back out the money that you're making from it, and more. 3, we have gotten into this awful habit of having people walk around public highways with masks on their face, ski masks, balaclavas, shirts all over the face. It may seem cool, but it stops the police and other legitimate people in this society from seeing and knowing who it is that's standing next to them or who it is that's doing something opposite them. The laws of the land, and many of you may not realize it, the Highways Act passed in 1925, 99 years ago, made it an offense for people to walk on the streets or be in a public place with masks. So much so, and I must confess that we learned it only because of COVID, because we then had to make adjustments for COVID. But the bottom line is that unless you have the permission of the Commissioner of Police, you cannot be wearing these masks and you cannot be wearing these t-shirts on your face to conceal. The operative thing will be concealment, so there may have to be an amendment to the actual section, but the section talks about masks, but we don't want you saying that you ain't wearing a mask, you're wearing a t-shirt. Once again, civil penalties. Pay some money for doing it. Because each time you do it, you're going to pay some money for doing it. There are those who work on construction sites or in landscape arena who genuinely may need to be able to have their face covered. Once again, COVID taught us a wonderful thing. We were able to print 3D masks that are transparent so that it can protect you, but you can still see who the person is that you are dealing with. Now, that does not mean that people are not going to try to defy these rules, but if they defy, there's the one here, own way you're going to feel. In addition to those 3 things, we are also going to have a robust regulation, and I've asked the Attorney General and the Deputy Prime Minister to meet with the owners of the hired car industry, because if your car is going to be used as an instrument of crime, remember that one of the first pieces of legislation that this government passed in 2018 or 19 was the Proceeds of Criminality, Proceeds and Instrumentalities of Crime Act. And that means that it can be confiscated and forfeited. Having said that, we don't want to set about doing that. We believe that there is room for greater levels of regulation and greater know your customer guidelines for anybody wanting to rent a car in this country, to hire a car in this country. And then you would have heard the police speak recently, and the fact that a man was charged for the 3D printing of receivers. I am here to tell you, of firearm receivers. I am here to tell you that the problem with instruments, and those way before us understood it when they created that very unfair offense, unlawful possession. Because a scissors is an instrument for good, for a seamstress, or for somebody who is using it for good purposes. But it can also be a weapon. A 3D printer is an instrument for good for those who want mask printed or things that will help provide greater efficiency. But it is equally now, as we can see, an instrument that can cause terror. And as a result, in the same way that you must apply for a license to import firearms, we will require that you have a license to import 3D printers. In the same way you have to be regulated with drones and have a license, same thing there. So that we will bring a regulatory framework for 3D printers, and it will also include the right of law enforcement to periodically inspect those who have these printers to ensure that they are not being used for nefarious purposes. My friends, we are also satisfied that there are a number of first-time offenders in this country who need a first chance, because in many instances they didn't even get a first chance, not just a second chance. And I've asked the Minister of Home Affairs to ensure that, separate from the work that they're doing on parole, that some of the programs which fell on the wayside since COVID for rehabilitation not only must be refocused, but that there must be a serious attempt to bring these programs and to expand them. Because when we don't have scale, we have good stories to tell, but we do not have transformation. And therefore, there must be a comprehensive program that seeks to rehabilitate, train, reintegrate, and where necessary, support. Now, we're conscious that there's a moral hazard in here, because while you are seeking to give opportunities to those who are coming out of prison, because if you don't give them an opportunity to earn a living fairly, tell me where you think they're going to go, Crystal. Back to crime. Because they have to live, they have to eat, and in some instances they have families to support. When Owen Arthur changed the rules of the public service to abolish casual workers, the biggest concern at the time was that it might have prevented persons who are convicts from being able to get jobs. Because the reality in small societies, not just Barbados, is that government is an employer of last resort, because many of the private sector people do not want to hire people who have had serious criminal convictions. As a result, we were able then to ensure that persons were still able to be hired at MTW or NCC, so that the fact that you were convicted of manslaughter and served your time does not preclude you from being able to do a job that was necessary. There's another man who had high skills, who did training for us, who came out after manslaughter. So we accept that we must create a space for persons who come back into society, because they are not condemned for life if they, in most instances, they reintegrate. But we are also conscious that there are some who will feel that I still want my chance and I never went to prison yet and I need my chance. And therefore the government is conscious that the opportunities that we are creating in this economy need to be real as well for them who have never committed crime. The reality is we started Construction Gateway 2 years ago. We started the Barbados Youth Advanced Corps on the eve of COVID. And while COVID did not allow us to expand, this year, over almost $12 million is being spent on that Youth Advanced Corps that has hundreds of young Barbadians involved in structured activity in the closest thing we have to a youth service without calling it a youth service. And that the program is a 2-year program, is intended to change behavior. There are people, if they seriously want, can apply to serve in the Barbados Police Service or in the Barbados Defense Force, because both of them have vacancies. So that there is no excuse for those who are not criminals from being able to work in areas that this economy can provide for them. And I should point out that at the end of March, unemployment in Barbados was at 6.9%, I believe. And those circumstances, what does that tell you? That there is a shortage of persons for key jobs. So the question is, are some of the people that we are seeing out there, do they really want to work? And I get it. Sometimes you may not always get the salary that you want. Sometimes you may not even get the job that you want. But I keep telling us that the job that we need to do is the job that we have and not the job that we want. And that doing the best job that we have is what admits us to being able to do the job that we ultimately want. The other major area of concern, and the Deputy Prime Minister is taking it into hand, is street lighting across the entire island in communities, but on highways as well. I know that she has been in conversation with the Chinese after her visit to China recently, and that they will give us 430 street lights, but we will buy beyond the 430 street lights. And like all of these things, in a post-COVID environment, the supply logistics is what is the constrainer in terms of us being able to get a number of the things that we are looking for. And I'm not going to go into the varied social programs here today, but suffice it to say that there are many, and Some have been in existence for some time, some will come. We have reached a point, fellow Barbadians, that is an inflection point in the life of this nation. We have a climate crisis. As we speak, the rain is pelting with thunder and lightning in St. Andrew yet again. The floods that you saw coming across Charles Road Bridge yesterday look like rivers, and we aren't known for them kind of rivers. I walked in here and I saw the black clouds again. Every day you're seeing the black clouds. When I talk about climate, everybody says, "What is you talking about climate again for?" This is our new reality. But not even the climate crisis will bring us to a point of poverty as fast as this reckless, wanton use of guns in pursuit of violence in this country. And I am saying to all of us who want a future as Barbadians that each of us must step up, because as the Commissioner of Police and his officers told you on Sunday night, it is a handful of people who are at the full front line. There are potentially a couple hundred of people who could be there if allowed to be there. And if we don't start to put the things in place to stem the flow of persons who want to behave in a wanton, reckless way, using weapons of mass destruction in a way that can decimate societies. I make the point all the time that life is about choices and that we need to be able to make the choices. But if we want to do foolishness, accept the consequences of it. I want to speak, as I end, to those persons who also want to commit trouble. Trust me, the law enforcement are much further ahead of most of you in a way that I am not at liberty to speak. You do not pull hands in a domino round and then skin it up for everybody to see the cards that you have. And the law enforcement officials of this country have been tasked and resourced sufficiently to keep the country safe. But what is now needed is not just their efforts, as I said. It is the collective part of all of us. When we talked about the fact that we had to do special education programs, which we are now setting up, not just for adults, but for those who came through COVID, people wonder what you're doing that for. We have to do it because there are people who did not get the full benefit of the educational opportunities, largely because of the intervention of a pandemic. But even before that, we have been playing and skirting around with what we are doing in our school system. And for me, in terms of educational transformation, and I've said to the leader of the opposition, this is the other area like crime that must be beyond fully, and healthcare, health policy, as opposed, I accept that they will want to criticize on other aspects of operational things, and that's fair. But in terms of the policy direction, there are certain decisions that we must keep to as one. When I became a young Minister of Education, I was deeply conscious that this country benefited from successive, stable policy trajectory in education. And what must not happen is that we who are here find ourselves so divided that we cannot protect the country and put it on a pathway that it deserves in order to give our children and our people the best chances that they must have. My friends, we have in the past shown what it is to go against the odds. Not just this generation of Barbadians, but previous generations of Barbadians. I believe we have it in us. I am conscious that the Caribbean region has 6 countries in the top 10 homicide per capita rates globally, and our other brothers and sisters in Central America and the Americas have there as well. Barbados is by no means the worst, but we are worse than we ever have been, and that is sufficient to cause us to act immediately with effort. I do not have eyes in the back of my head, nor do any of us. And I want to say to you, therefore, that my team and government is willing to recognize that at all costs, we have a duty to work with all right-thinking Barbadians and institutions, because we know that the pathway to success, the pathway to overcoming challenges, is by working together as a people. We don't have to like everybody, but we need to work together with common purpose. We are available for any questions that you may want to ask. Thank you. You got anything? No?
Good afternoon.
I have to talk a little louder, man.
Good afternoon.
Thank you.
No. Prime Minister, I want to just ask you to address two things quickly. Let me start from the part where you talk about fining people who are walking around with masks and so on. But we know that motorcycles have been used to commit crime. And there are motorcyclists driving around, albeit they have the helmet with black masks on their heads. To what extent will the council address this?
We've spoken to the National Security Council about that, and in fact, it's not everything that I've announced here this evening that we're doing, and I want to repeat that. One of the reasons why the government took the decision to get the motoring federations and the various motoring clubs that we're not talking and this one ain't going there and that for years, and we said, everybody come back, come off the roads and go to Bushy Park. The difficulty is that for drag racing and for the motorcycles, those are the two now that we have to be able to deal with. And I'm told that there's a strip that we can once paved will allow the drag racing to take place. I don't want to stop anybody having fun on a motorcycle, but they must do so in a controlled way. And the police have already said to me that they will be stepping up to the plate with respect to those who believe that they can use the roads of Barbados as a drag racing track for motorcycle scrambles and all of those. It will mean that they're also going to have to develop some capacity of their own, because you and I both know that the benefit of a scrambler is that it can get through places that a car and other things can't get through. So you can't fight fire with smoke. Not smoke, I was going to say with a breath as if you're blowing out a candle. You can't fight it. So that we have to ensure that they not only be given that capacity, but that their officers be trained in a way that will provide the level of safety for them to be able to tell the fellas, cut it out. This is not worth it. I have made the comment that about 2 months ago, I went into Saul Warren's a Sunday evening, and about 10, 12 motorbikes in there skinning out. And when I got out, about 3 of them skin off and went out the car park, but the majority of them stopped. And I called the fellas. I said, fellas, we don't know that if any one of these hit one of them tanks there, that we ain't only going to hear about you as a gone, but all the rest of the people inside this gas station. I am the most amazed person that a gas station can be a place for people being reckless. And I've said it over and over and over. But it's not everything, and that's why I say that we have all slid, but we now got to say enough is enough is enough. The vending, I spoke about it over and over. Said that I'm frightened that somebody can get injured or killed. Lo and behold, a man's foot on social media going wrong when he talked about how somebody come off the road and hit him for coconut vending. I'm happy that we started the conversations informally, but we are waiting on the engineering designs. And we've worked with Massey and the owners of the mall next door, to be able to see how we can move them off the street. Barbados is not a place where people sell vegetables on the shoulder of the road. Barbados was never a place where we did this. It's not that you want to stop people from selling. You want them to sell, but you want them to sell somewhere that is safe, that doesn't put them at risk. Because if they're put at risk, they're pressuring the hospital and beds. If they're put at risk or dead, the families now have nobody to support for them. So it don't make no sense. And therefore, once those designs are finished for Warrens, full steam ahead. You've already seen what we have done at Newton, and there are those who are trying to defy that still and go to other locations to sell. You cannot do it. You cannot do it and expect that cars advertise on the corner of a roundabout, blocking people's vision. All of those things must stop. And I'm not blaming anybody today. The government is not blaming anybody. We're just simply saying we have eyes in the front of our head. Let us do it. Today, the public service vehicle people spoke about their concerns. We know, and the Deputy Prime Minister has been working, because we said, and we saw it last year with Vanwick, that you need cameras in public service vehicles. From the time that shooting took place in Eagle Hall, 8 o'clock in the morning, you need to protect people on public service vehicles. And therefore the cameras and the GPSs are not to get in anybody's business or to see who's sleeping with who or who going where or who. It is to protect the public. So that in those circumstances, I thank you for reminding us. As I said, we're not announcing everything today, but I am giving you enough to let you know that this is the pathway that we are on. And more than the initiatives, I want you to understand the attitude. This is a forever change. Some may say that I shouldn't use this analogy, but I use the analogy of substance abuse or addiction because it could be addiction to food, not just drugs. You know what happens to those persons who are subject to substance abuse, who are addicts? You're going to fight the battle how? Each and every day. And this is what this country must do to be able to have a community that is capable of raising its children, giving people opportunities. Will there be crime? Yes, there will be crime. But do we need to have acts of terror and acts where people are panicked into wanting to stay home because they're frightened from going here and there? This country is too small. 166 square miles is not even like some of the bigger countries in the region that you can go and hide. It is too small. And therefore, I ask us to be able to treat to this in this way. A serious whole-of-nation approach, recognizing that not every day will we score 100%. Not every day will we score sometimes 80%. But we must remain committed to staying on course and doing the things that we know. Children need the early groceries of morality. Whether you are a Christian, a Hindu, a Muslim, a Rasta, whatever, teach them. You teach them, they learn. At least even if they deviate, they know what the base is. And the point that I wanted to make, and I should have addressed earlier, we'll rate a child of 7, 8, 10, 12, 14, 15, got on a block at 8 and 9 o'clock at night and 10 o'clock at night. What right they got on a block? I want... In my house, when I was growing up, I couldn't even watch television from 7 o'clock Sunday night to Friday afternoon, 4 o'clock. You could listen to the radio, you could read books, and you could watch the news. But that was it. And I'm saying to us, who makes those decisions as to who is in or out of a block? Who is in or out of a house at the correct time? It's the family, it's the godparents, it's the neighbors. All of us together, pull together.
My second question is, we've been talking a lot about the importation of guns in this 166 square mile island. What progress have been made in getting to the root of the importation of guns?
Look, a lot of the guns come in singly. Barbados does not have a large stash compared to other islands. But we have enough to cause panic. And many of those guns have come in over the years. Guns don't spoil. They don't go in a compost heap and rot down. When we became the government, and I don't say this from a partisan perspective, we had to buy scanners for the port. The scanners that were there were dysfunctional. We bought scanners when we had World Cup 2007, when I was chairing security for the country, for the region. By 2012, more than half the scanners, of the 60 cameras, were not functional. And a lot of the sensors that were needed on the scanners were defunct. They could not get it done and fixed. What did that mean? What was coming through the port? The then Commissioner of Police, Mr. Griffith, and the then Attorney General, I think you all carried the story, if I recall. It was on the front page of The Nation. I can't remember where it was on Barbados Today, but I'm sure that you didn't let Barbados The Nation scoop you. But So we knew from then. One of the first decisions we took as a government was we spent, it was almost 25 million? $25 million in buying scanners. Now, hear me. And the Security Council took a decision again recently that the scanners which we bought were the technology that applied at the time. And the technology has changed. And the technology has become even more comprehensive, almost similar to medical imaging technology. All of us know about medical imaging. I can't see inside the organs, you can't see inside our organs, but the equipment that the medical imaging has can do. And it's no different for containers. At the same time, the weaponry has changed. We take it for granted about the history of how assault weapons have gotten here. Assault weapons were banned in the US, I believe, up until 2004. So it is not a thing that was always available to our people. What right does anybody have with an AK-47? What right does anybody have with an AR-15? You're not at war. And in those circumstances, we also recognize that what was happening, and the police have clearly shown it to us, is that not all weapons come in as weapons. And that is why the find of the 3D printer doing the firearm receivers was so important for the police. But many of the weapons come in broken down. There are people before the courts now who are mechanics for being charged, for being involved in being one of the people to put back the weapons together. So I want us to be very clear on where are the areas of danger. The airport, the seaport, the couriers, all of the couriers, that's where they've been picking up people and holding people periodically, the post office, and then of course those who try to get through the coastal arc of Barbados with bringing in drugs with guns. No big stash of guns comes at any one time because there's no war in that traditional sense, but 3 guns here, 4 guns here, 2 guns here, 5 guns here. And that's how it's been coming in. But we have that old Bajan saying that one blow is kill old cow. And the cumulative impact of it is what is killing us now. And that is why the police will be aggressive in being able to get out guns. The National Council will have to advisory council, as well as government, will have to make a decision, as I said, on one, whether this country wants, like Australia and others, to become gun-free societies, because for whatever reason, some people like guns, they don't know why. 2, whether, even with all of that whether there should be a further gun amnesty, because at the end of the day, the AG has already ensured that the laws that we have for persons using guns the first time is 10 years. 10-year minimum sentence, mandatory, unless they can show cause. And then for a second offense is 20 years. Okay, 20 to life. So I always believe that if you're going to be aggressive in shutting down things, you give people notice, you give people time, and you correct yourself. If at the end of the day you had notice, you had time, and you're still doing it, what does that tell you, Emmanuel? That you don't care. The fact that that young man came into custody today tells me what? That he liked life. That he ain't want dead. You understand? And I know deep down in my heart that a lot of what is happening is people not thinking. I know what it is to be a criminal lawyer and going to the prisons. And 90% of the men who I represented who were charged with murder, crying like babies, remorseful, because they don't realize the full consequences of what they've done until it's too late.
Are there specific things that this government is willing to do to address the ports of entry in particular? Are we going to invest in better technology as it relates to these scanners? Have you committed to that?
Absolutely. And we've taken the decision on that. We're in the process of dealing with the investigation of the new technology and the procurement of the new scanners with the entity that we're dealing with. Because what we have is good, but what is now available in terms of technology is better. Immediately, Crystal, we've already met with the suppliers, the person who is advising us to put everything together. And we met with them and we were in contact. They did their audits even before Nelson Street then. Because I know there's some people say, oh, this is just a knee-jerk reaction. They had already done the audits at the airport, and they were completing to do the audits now at the seaport.
What do you say to Barbadians that question the implementation of yet another council to address this particular issue?
This is not another council. This is the people of Barbados represented to get the feedback and ownership and participation as wide as possible. And if the government wanted to stay singularly focused, a lot of the things we can do on our own. But what matters now is not what the government alone is doing. It is the ownership of it. And that's why I said Mrs. Tannis and the bishop, almost like they read my head. Because what they also recognize, as others have, is that you're going to only win these battles if there is whole of nation. We could not save the dollar if it was just the government trying to save the dollar. We could not get out of COVID if it was just the government trying to get out of COVID. We couldn't do the pension reform if it was just that. So you need the council to be able to have the capacity, and it's not just dealing with legislation. You need it to be able to have the kind of feedback and the kind of buy-in to policies. When we get now, for example, to things that we may have to do in schools, you need the 4 educational stakeholders at the table trying to see what they can do and what they will agree to, because there are going to be some difficult decisions too. And I know that some of the things that we are speaking about, people will say, oh, we want that. I know it's going to be contentious. But the fact that it is contentious must not and will not stop us. And therefore, what we need is that broad-based ownership to be able to do a number of these things. I want to repeat, this is apolitical. It's not about politics. And that council, hopefully, will give the average Bajan the confidence that we've created the space for Bajans to come in and to help lift the heavy weight that's necessary to stop the slide into where other countries in the region have gone as a result of the incursion of gang violence and gun violence. Yeah. And there's nobody from the government executive that's on the council, because they will come back to us. Okay?
Madam Prime Minister, you mentioned earlier corruption in high and low places. Now there is a perception out there that the weapons are coming into the island through people who are in authority. Why is it that from time to time we keep hearing this, but we don't see people in authority being charged or brought before the court?
I asked the same question. And it was the asking of that question that led us to agree that we need a dedicated agency to fight corruption. That is the Anti-Corruption and Anti-Terrorism Agency that Mr. Dottin heads up. The staffing of it has taken us a little longer than we would have liked, but that is now beginning to get fully operational. And the bottom line is that just in the same way that you have police go to work every day to keep order and to fight crime, you will have people go to work every day to protect this country against corruption and against terrorism.
Are we with that?
Literally, the Defense Board, for example, agreed to the secondment of persons about a month ago to go over with him. The police also agreed to persons who are now being sorted out to go across there, and I believe that they probably will open up to a few people, but no later than the 1st of October, the AG is telling me.
Based on all you have said, what can Barbadians expect out of this? Because, you know, you had the peace program, you had SOS, you had the truce, and here we are today with...
and we could be a lot worse, Antoinette. All of them have played their part and will continue to play their part. There is no single solution to fighting this battle, and it is going to be the combined impact. I have the Youth Advance Corps. Are we going to destroy the Youth Advance Corps because there's still some youngsters playing the fool? No, we're not going to. Because instead of it being 15 youngsters or 20 youngsters that we worry about now, it might be 500. It might be 1,000. So this is not a zero-sum game, and it's not an exam in school. This is real life. And real life means that you're going to have to attack things from different... You run a paper. So you know that there are different combinations and permutations, sometimes that you expect and sometimes that you don't expect. And that's the reality. And part of the difficulty of, and you may say that I like to talk. I like to talk 'cause I hungry now. I keep telling you so. 'Cause when before I talk, I don't eat. But what I have to do is to be able sometimes to speak directly to Barbadians, because if all you read is 4 column inches, or all you hear, Stetson, is 60 seconds on radio, then you do not get the story, nor do you understand the nuances or the steps that we have to do. I have said, oh, right, this is not the entire program. There are things that we have done and are still doing. There are things that we have done and will abandon. There are things that we have done, that we will do that we have not yet done. There's some that I've announced here, and there's some things that I cannot say to you, because at the end of the day, you can't. But there have been credible successes, and that's why you hear me thank the police each time. Are there things that we can do to strengthen the police further? Yes, there are. And are we doing them? Yes, we are. But have the police been doing a credible job? Yes, they've been catching people within reasonable times. Are there some cold cases that we would like them to be able to uncover, especially in St. Philip? Yes, there are. But at the end of the day, we're moving in the right direction. But the problem is we need more people working together, moving in that direction. And that's why, Crystal, it is not just simply about another council. This is about giving expression to the widest group of Barbadians possible in order for us to be able to make the decisions. I just remember the minimum wages. For 20-something years in this country, we were trying to implement a minimum wage, and everybody tell us, no, no, no. And I appointed a Blue Ribbon Commission, chaired by Sir David, Comrade Goddard, who has just passed, regrettably, Joe Goddard, served on it, and 3 other people. They allowed us to be able to get to the point where we could make that decision in the middle of COVID. But did we and should we have gotten there many years before? Of course, but we didn't. And there's a little impasse. Impasse. Yes, Stetson. You may have to come and use the mic. Certainly more, Antoinette. Certainly. You all are the same family.
I just want to know what is your response to the calls on the calling program, radio programs, for the head of the AG and whosoever else are at the top, and crime is still...
I have been in politics for 35 years. You can pick sense from that. That I know a political ball and googly when I see it. You understand? This Attorney General has passed more reform. Let me bring it out. Because sometimes you've got to remind people. When we came office, the Attorney General presided over us moving from 2 criminal judges to 8 criminal judges. Similarly, those 8 judges are dedicated. Up to today, the president of the Bar Association told me that when she calls meetings at 2 o'clock, very often with persons from the criminal bar, they cannot attend because the judges are working full days. They were not working. It is this Attorney General that has worked closely with the judiciary to get that change of behavior. And he can give you the stats as to how many cases have been completed, particularly the serious criminal cases, as compared to what we found when we came in. Secondly, that we have also increased the number of prosecutors. It was this Attorney General who has presided over shaping and bringing that in. Similarly, we have had, for example, an improvement in dealing with criminal. I spoke about that just now with the criminal matters. The legislation that I just talked about, all the corruption legislation. This Attorney General, and I was an Attorney General, this Attorney General has brought more legislation to modernize Barbados' fight against corruption and to modernize the criminal justice system than any other. This Attorney General also would have ensured that the Law Reform Commission has been put in place to ensure that other difficult pieces, trials without juries, plea bargaining, I can go on and on. I don't think you want me to list over and over. And I'm saying to you that I am satisfied that Dale Marshall is a hard-working Attorney General who has been successful. When the history of Barbados is written, you're going to have to see the points at which reform takes place. What Kirk Humphrey is doing with the reform of the welfare system has not been done in decades. What Dale Marshall is doing with the reform of the criminal justice system. We left and we came in and found a 19th century criminal justice system. So when I say to you that I've been in politics for 35 years, I know, and Stetson, you may want to stand, but I can speak plainly now. Those call-in programs have been a wonderful way for Bajans to express themselves over the years and to give solutions and to vent and to talk. But I am not foolish. And I know that there are a number of the same callers who have an agenda. And on both sides, you may say. But except that I think that most of my people are busy working, which is why they're so one-sided, as opposed to them having, because you don't hear many people attacking anybody else but the government on those programs. Stetson, appropriate time to come to you.
Protocol would dictate to introduce myself. Stetson Bab, head of New Star Com.
Thank you.
Madam Prime Minister, you've articulated both short, medium, and long-term strategy.
No,
You've articulated both short, medium, and long-term strategies to combat crime. What you perhaps, if you could, but you also spoke to the sense of dread, fear that some people in this country have about the crime situation. Maybe perhaps you can just summarize for Miss Adams in Adams Castle and Miss Ben in Ben Hill, who's frightened right now, who's afraid. Give her a sense of why she has this. The situation is in hand. Why the situation is in hand? What immediate steps you have and are taking immediately, and what progress immediately you have.
Well, I think
You are doing
a
some
lot
of
of
it.
what I've said here, I've given you and shown you that even as we speak this week, the police have been highly effective from as early as Sunday morning right back through to the situation with the man coming back from Canada whenever he does in dealing with this situation. By the same token, I've given you the assurance that every single resource that we have within our limited capacity, and it is not as limited as it was 6 years ago, will be used to be able to do what is necessary for law enforcement or the social programs so that Barbadians can truly have a chance at winning this battle. We have created an independent entity with a secretariat, its own secretariat, to be able to have its own life and to ensure that it has access to the best possible advice, but equally, it will work, the council will receive stuff from us, but it will also of its own send stuff to us. We have equally said that there are a number of matters that don't need consultation with the council because some of them are already on the law books, and all they need is a modernization of the penalties, and that they need an enforcement of them. And with all due respect, that has to be done not by the political class, but by those who are responsible for executing and performing the duties of enforcing law in this country. But at the same time, we have said to those households that if you see something, say something. And that if you find yourself in a difficult position, many years ago, I crafted a draft plan on justice, peace, and security. And the last chapter in it, chapter 7, was reducing opportunities for crime. We need to remind Barbadians that they themselves have to take responsibility for their own security and for the vigilance. And a number of households have already done it. And a number of houses in my constituency that got cameras. There are a number of people who look out for each other. These things are normal. So I hope that the lady in Ben Hill or Adams Castle, but I also want to appeal to you that let us have a system put in place where you can validate what has really happened in a crime scene rather than social media speculating. Because when I landed in Barbados on Sunday, the first thing I heard was that 2 children are dead. Not dead, 2 children were shot. And that this happened on a beach, Thunder Bay. When I finally got briefed by the police, it was in First Avenue, Lower Carlton, and it was one too many. But I'm using that only to say that I have asked the police to designate somebody to be able to speak early and to ensure that what goes on social media does not carry people's blood pressure up, because there have been too many instances as well where you hear, I had shooting down there. When I called the police said, we haven't got no report of the shooting, but we sent people down there they've combed the ground, whatever. Or the facts of the shooting may not necessarily accord, like Sunday, with the reality of what has happened. And one of the reasons why we asked the Security Council, asked the Commissioner to be fully open with the society, is that the only way we're going to solve it is if we do it together. So that if people wonder what really happened and don't know and depending on rumor, you get in trouble.
Mr. Prime Minister, may I switch gears a bit? You had promised a probe into hope. What's with that as we speak?
I never speak about crime, but the probe is going to happen. And we've already spoken to Mr. Alric Scott, who has agreed that he would chair. We were having a little difficulty finding it, and I am aware that the Auditor General started the investigation. And we felt that we would give him space to get out because it's the same files, but his investigation will be different from the departmental investigation that we want at Hope, which will look not just at anything that went wrong, but will also be able to recommend systems, if they have not already been put in place, that need to be put in place to ensure value for money and greater efficiency as we go forward. Okay? That is your googly, but I played it. Huh? What? Yeah. Anything else? That's it? I want to thank everybody for coming. I want to thank Barbadians for listening. I want to urge Barbadians that I can't promise success. Many years ago, in opposition, I said that I shall walk even if it is me and my God alone. I say so because the decision to step up, whether in terms of where you are as family by family, community by community, or in the context of your job and institutionally, is a personal decision. I strongly believe, however, that if we step up, not all, because we will never get all, but the majority of us, to do the heavy lifting, that we can defy the odds. Right now in the Americas, the biggest problem is gun violence. Whether it is the United States of America, and you see how they have now incorporated holding parents liable for the actions of their children in gun violence. Ironically, when we did that years ago with the amendments to the Education Act in 1995, Antoinette and Emmanuel, you might remember, Crystal, you were too young, that made parents liable for the actions of their children in vandalism in schools. What has been our weakness as a people? That we do things and we sprint, but we don't hold a marathon. We need to become marathon runners. We need to stay the course. We need to be able to make sure that this issue, which is bedeviling not just Barbados, but all of us. That is why we were to host a symposium on crime here for CARICOM, but we believe that we will do it in Guyana as opposed to Barbados, purely because of another heads meeting that will take place in Guyana in November. It is against that backdrop, therefore, that I want to say to Bajans, you are understandably concerned, as are we, but we have it in us to be able to rise over these challenges and to do the things that are necessary. Will we have total perfection? Probably not. But can we do it and turn the corner? I believe so. And I want to thank those of you in the media for continuing to engage. As I said, we will work with you and make sure you have access to the information and the things that will help Bajans to place things in context as well. But suffice it to say, this one is for the long journey, not the short one. Thank you. No, I